Hey there, it's Pennie Saum with Brave and Unbroken, and we're on episode 3 of the Margaret and Pennie Show. Margaret, you want to introduce yourself?
Margaret Hoelzer. I am a two-time Olympian in swimming and the national spokesperson for the National Children's Advocacy Center and a survivor as well.
Thanks. We're here. It's April, Child Abuse Prevention Month and Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and we're bringing to you each of these short videos, a topic related to those. And today we want to talk about the F word, forgiveness.
Yes, the other one.
Do you want to jump in?
Yeah. So forgiveness, I think, is a hot button topic for a lot of people. Basically, whether or not you should forgive people in general in life, but specifically whether or not you should forgive your abuser or not.
I agree. And I think as survivors and victims, we are pressured, I think, by society to forgive our abusers. And I think we get burdened and overwhelmed by that pressure.
I would agree. And I think there's a stigma around it. And it's definitely, I know that I have felt pressured I'm trying to think, how do I want to say this? There's a politically correct way to answer it, right? And there's I think a way that people feel like you have to forgive people. It would be the politically correct answer, and it's not politically correct to not want to forgive someone. And I think the reality is that's a very personal choice, and you can't tell someone that they have to forgive someone or that they don't have to forgive someone. But I think there is a stigma around not forgiving your abuser, and I don't think that that's a place that society or anyone has the right to tell you, what you should or shouldn't do.
I agree. And I think it is a choice, right? It's definitely, I'm sure that there are people that do forgive, but it's definitely the person's choice and their ability to just feel free to make that decision or not.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's interesting. I know for me personally, I define forgiveness, I think, a little bit differently than most people do. So when I think of forgiveness, I think of that as meaning that you're absolving someone of their sins, and specifically absolving them of maybe the crime that they did or what they did to you, specifically in this case, the abuse that they, what they did to you, basically, the abuse that occurred. And one, I don't really think it's my place to grant that forgiveness. I mean, I'm not God. I would love to say that I have the power.
Yeah.
To me, I kind of think that forgiveness is between that person and their higher power, their God. So who am I to say that what does that mean? What does that matter if I forgive them? Honestly, who cares? Like, right. I think that's between them and their God and what they believe in. So I don't know that it's really up to me anyways. But more importantly, I look at it and I think from, I have a psychology background, my undergraduate in college, and, by no means am I a professional at all. But when I think about it, I think people associate forgiveness and say, forgiveness means that you're moving on and that you're not holding anger in your heart. And I look at it, and again, my definition of forgiveness is more of this, you're absolving someone of their sins. Right. Moving on has absolutely nothing to do with forgiveness. You can move on and not have forgiven someone. Right. So I would say 100% when people say, oh, you need to forgive someone, you need to not hold anger in your heart and you need to move on. I 100% agree with that. I think when you are angry, that can be very, very destructive. People can be self-destructive. They can self-harm. Mm-hmm. Even just holding anger inside can, make you depressed and just, it makes moving on just very, very difficult. So I do think it's very, very important to be able to move on. And at some point you have to let go of the anger that you have at your abuser and at the abuse in general, right? I mean, it's obviously nobody's happy that this happened to them. So I think it's important that we let go of that anger But to me, the process of letting go and moving on, that's totally separate. And that has nothing to do with forgiveness. That's just moving on.
I agree. I'm going to
So,
pause this so I can close the glass door while the guy is weed whacking. Hold on. That's good. Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that when we get pressured by therapists and family and friends that we need to forgive before somebody is ready or wants to, I think it's very, very ignorant and kind of harboring their own reasons. Like, do they want us to forgive because there's something that they're holding or they're interested in, right? And then
yes.
also, do they want our pain to like, in their pain to like just vaporize, like sunshine and unicorn and rainbows and everything's fine and it's going to be great, forgive because of me. It just doesn't work that way.
No, and I think that's a very valid point. I think oftentimes, especially when abuse is within the family, you will have someone say, let's say it was grandma or grandpa, for example, and you have the parents saying, you need to forgive them. And I think that's maybe the parents themselves feeling guilty, and they're trying to absolve their own guilt and make you forgive grandma or grandpa because the parent is feeling guilty that maybe they didn't see it. Right. So they're trying to absolve themselves, and they don't have a right to ask that, right? I mean, it's that's a relationship between you and this person. That's not between they need to work their own relationship out with what happened between them and you and them and that abuser.
Right.
So
yeah,
I think that's
with you,
very valid.
The healing thing, like you can move on, you can heal without forgiveness. It'd be like, you can't be healed unless you have a scar or something, right? You know what I mean? Like, oh, if I don't have this badge of forgiveness on me, then there's no way I can move on and be healed. So I think you got a good point there.
Well, and I know, in my family, I think one thing my mom actually did a really phenomenal job of. So I was abused as a child, and when I finally told my mom I was 11 years old, and like so many people, we tried going through the legal system. We went to court. My case was thrown out of court, so nothing ended up happening. And that was devastating. That was devastating for me. That was devastating for my parents. But when that happened, we came home and we never talked about my abuser again, ever. And my mom made a very conscious decision of, instead of making it about the abuser and focusing on him, he didn't matter. Because my mom looked at it as, I have an 11-year-old girl that is not acting normal. I mean, you could look the same thing as saying, this kid has cancer or something, right? Like, I have a child who's very, very sick. So instead of being angry at the disease, that's not going to solve anything. How do I make this child better, right? How do I figure out how to get my 11-year-old acting like a normal 11-year-old? So we never talked about my abuser. We never talked about him. And we just focused on getting me back to normal. And so honestly, to this day, I don't think about him. The only time I ever think about him is like when I'm talking about him, like right now, or
right.
My story. So for me, I would say he doesn't matter to me. I don't sit around, sticking pins in a voodoo doll or something like that. Like, I'm not angry at him. But I absolutely haven't forgiven him. He means less than nothing to me. Like, I literally he's not a part of my life. I don't think about him. And he truly just doesn't matter in any way, shape, or form. Right. And I think, to me, if he matters to me, that's what gives him power. And he has no hold in my life whatsoever. He has no power in my life whatsoever. So I'm 100% confident and comfortable saying, absolutely, hell no, have I forgiven him. I don't think he deserves my forgiveness. But I also can 100% say that I'm not angry, and I have moved on, and he's not controlling my life. So to your original point, I think if someone chooses to say that they have forgiven, or if someone actually has, in fact, forgiven the person, that's fantastic, right? Like, this is not a religion, not a show meant to be about what religion you are or aren't, or, what choices you're making. So if somebody has chosen to forgive their abuser, that's 100% fine. It's mostly just that, to our original point, was that people that are pressured into that and feel like they have to, I think you don't have to. And more importantly, I think the issue is the ability to move on, and moving on and forgiveness aren't mutually exclusive.
I would agree. And I think also, I think that pressure kind of goes back to the abuse and the guilt and the grooming and everything else, right? So then what we find is as if as sexual abuse victims and survivors are being pressured to forgive, it puts them back in that place of being victimized.
Yeah,
Because there's others people are trying to control them and what their healing and journey looks like.
absolutely. Well, and again, the reason I say this is a hot topic is one of my favorite things to do when I do speeches is Q&As, and this is something that always comes up. This is something people want to know about. Have you forgiven your abuser? And for a long time, I kind of tried to avoid answering it. I would sort of just dance around the issue because I was uncomfortable just saying, no, I haven't, right? Because I felt like that I wasn't allowed to say that. And I
Yeah.
also felt like that somehow by saying that, it undermined me as a speaker because it implied that I somehow had not progressed as far in this journey of healing,
Mm-hmm.
um, as I wanted to have progressed, or as that I was, trying to express to people, right? And again, I mean, everyone's journey of healing is totally personal, and there's no race. It doesn't matter where you are on it. There's no first or second place.
Right.
But more importantly, it has nothing to do with that. It's not like, oh, you have forgiven your abuser, so therefore, you've advanced more than she has or he has, or you've taken the right steps. I don't think it has anything to do with that. I mean, I can 100% confidently say I will absolutely never forgive my abuser. And that doesn't mean that I'm somehow further behind or that I'm not doing something correctly. It's just, like I said, in my opinion, it's a different belief system that actually has nothing to do with religion at all.
Right.
And in my opinion, it's actually just a difference in definition on what I define it as, right? Like, you can completely disagree with me and how you define it, but yeah, I would argue that I think the thing that's important is moving on, and I think that is, in my opinion, what is very, very important, because yes, you don't want to be caught in that victim mentality where you are angry and you're just so holed up in this mindset that you can't move forward with your life.
Yeah, I agree. And when I first started talking, and actually my first website, it was based on forgiveness, plugged into church, a church. And as I tried to move through that, I realized how detrimental it was, because there was really no way for me to get through the healing that I needed to do, where I felt like I was doing what the world wanted me to do. And this therapist at the time, to
Mm-hmm.
forgive and move on and use the Bible. Not that there's anything wrong with that if that's people's choice, but for me, I needed tangible things that I could move through, but still hold a space that what he did was wrong. And it's okay for me to be angry, but to still function in the world as a successful person.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And that's I think the whole thing is I have, and this actually, I think this goes back to another conversation that we've had about victimization and being a survivor. I've never had a problem with the word victimization.
Right.
But that goes back to that argument, is saying this was wrong. What happened to me was not okay. I was a victim. I was victimized. And it's acknowledging that. It's holding space for that and acknowledging it was out of your control. And yes, you are allowed to be angry at that. Are there moments when I'm upset that this thing happened? Of course. Usually I'm upset when I'm being triggered by something.
Right.
We actually talked about this for a few minutes before we started filming, but I yesterday I was having just an emotional day, and
Right.
you know for no particular reason, I just was being emotional, and I knew it. To be honest, I knew it was my own issues, and more than anything, I just needed a good night's sleep, and I honestly felt better today. But
Restart
that
button, right?
happens. What was that?
the restart button.
Yes. And that happens, you know, and I knew it. I mean, that was the thing. I knew in the moment that it was a little bit irrational, and that was okay too. I mean, unfortunately, sometimes just knowing that you're having an irrational moment doesn't mean you can step out of it and and be less irrational.
Yeah.
But at least I realized that it you know, it wasn't going to last forever, and you know, it would, you have to kind of, I think, allow it to, you just have to allow it to happen, and you start the next day and, you know, move forward from there.
Yeah, I agree. And I think just as abuse survivors, I think we all need to remember that our innocent was taken and destroyed, and it wasn't anything upon us that we had done wrong. And I think we just need to remember that. And so that makes it so we don't have to forgive anybody. There's nothing that we have a responsibility or a need to do. There's nothing that they deserve. They raped or molested or whatever your abuse was, and you were innocent and unnaturally destroyed. And I think that's really, really important to remember. That doesn't mean that you can't be successful and that you
No.
can't become a survivor. Survivor's hard work, and we'll probably be talking about that in the next couple sessions. But you can grab a hold of your bootstraps and do what you need to do. It's hard work, but you can do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, I 100% believe that anyone can be a survivor, and yeah, I mean, it is hard work, absolutely, but anyone, absolutely anyone can get there. I think you had some pretty good points though, that you were telling me earlier about being a survivor, or sorry, about forgiveness. Do you want to mention those?
Remember which? Oh, from my little list.
From your list.
Yes. Okay, let's do these real quick here. So number one, you don't have to forgive anybody. The idea that you must forgive the person who sexually abused you is the worst kind of nonsense that can ever happen. You can forgive if you want, but you don't have to. Number two, forgiveness isn't one size fits all. We can
Yep.
only forgive for something that has been done against us. It has no meaning outside the context of the specific offense. So it's not like forgiveness equals healing or forgiveness equals whatever. So that's important to remember. Abusers of children depend upon the complicity-induced guilt of their victims. And that's where we were talking about the grooming, the violence, the emotional piece that all comes with the abuse. And then the final one, scroll down here, is asking for forgiveness doesn't mean deserving it. So if for some reason your abuser is in your life still and they're asking you to forgive them, doesn't mean they deserve it. Doesn't even mean you have to do that or be around them.
And they're going to try to make you, they're trying to make you feel bad, right? Like that's, if you feel guilty, that's because they're good at what they do. That's how these people are successful, right? I mean, that's not saying that you're doing something wrong. They're
Absolutely.
the ones doing something wrong, right? So that is a hard position to be in, obviously. But yeah, just because they're asking for it in no way, shape, or form means that you have to do it. Absolutely not.
Agreed. So this is our Easter message, actually.
Yeah. So happy Easter.
Yeah, we wanted to make this very explicit and direct because of Easter. And I think it's really important just to remember that your people, you were damaged at no fault of your own. And we just want you to remember that the societal pressures of forgiveness and all kinds of other stuff that come upon us, our smiles, and that, you know, you can't be hurting inside and all those things is not your fault. So just do the best you can today.
Absolutely, absolutely. And remember that moving on, I've said a couple times today that I think moving on is important. That, but that takes time, and that's going to look different for everyone. You know, one person might heal in, you know, X amount of time. The other person's going to heal in Y amount of time. The next person's going to be Z amount of time, right? Like there's no correct way to heal, and there's no one journey to do that. There's no timeline for that. So yes, while I'm going to sit here and say it is important to move on and to move past it and to heal, that doesn't look the same for anyone, and there's no correct timeline. So it's going to be different, and it's you know, you can read all the self-help books you want, and there's obviously a lot of amazing advice out there, but there's size fits all, and that timeline is going to be a little bit different.
Agreed. And give yourself grace today.
Yep.
And
absolutely.
sending love to everyone.
Yay!
We'll catch you on the next one.